The auditorium was thick with anticipation, the air electric with the kind of tension that only a nationally televised debate can summon. Under the blazing lights, two figures stood behind their podiums: Karoline Leavitt, the rising firebrand, eager to score a headline, and Kash Patel, the calm strategist who had built his life on discipline and service. The moderator had just finished a question about loyalty, belonging, and what it truly means to be American when Karoline leaned forward, a sly smirk stretching across her face. She paused, letting the silence hang for just a beat. Two long eyes, flickering toward the cameras as if to say, "Watch this." And then she dropped it. "Maybe you should just go back to India." The words sliced through the room like a blade. Gasps shot up from the crowd, the kind of stunned reaction that doesn't come from disagreement, but from disbelief. A few scattered chuckles tried to fill the vacuum, but they quickly died under the weight of the moment. The moderator froze, eyes wide, caught between shock and the duty to move things forward. Even the cameras seemed to hesitate, lingering on Karoline's smug expression, as if to capture the exact second she thought she had won the crowd, but the crowd was not with her. Not really. A woman in the front row shook her head in disgust. A man in the back muttered under his breath, "Did she really just say that?" On social media, the clip was already being cut, clipped, and replayed. Millions would soon see it, frame by frame, the smirk, the insult, the audible gasp, and at the center of it all stood Kash Patel. His eyes didn't flinch. He didn't shift his weight or tighten his jaw. He simply stood, shoulders squared, absorbing the venom with the same calm he had carried through far tougher storms. His silence became its own power, forcing the audience to sit with the ugliness of what they had just heard. For a heartbeat, the stage was frozen in time. Two paths stretched before him: lash out in anger or rise above the insult with something. No one expected what Kash said next. No one saw coming. The insult did not exist in a vacuum. It landed on a stage wired to millions of homes, amplified by cameras that missed nothing, sharpened by microphones that turned every word into history. This was no small-town argument in a crowded hall. This was prime time, a high-profile debate broadcast across America. Every pause, every expression, every misstep would be replayed endlessly by news anchors, chopped into sound bites for social media, and dissected on talk radio. And in that crucible, Karoline's words carried a weight far heavier than she understood. For generations, debates like this had been the theater where America wrestled with its own soul. The question was never just policy, but identity. Who belongs here? Who gets to call themselves American? And who dares to suggest that someone else does not? Karoline had thrown herself headlong into that question, but in doing so, she hadn't just attacked Kash Patel. She had struck at the very heart of millions who had lived the immigrant story, who had endured those same dismissive slurs in classrooms, workplaces, and neighborhoods. Her smirk was more than arrogance. It was a mirror of every moment someone had been told they didn't belong. The weight of the moment was impossible to ignore. The camera zoomed in, searching for Kash's face. Was he rattled? Did he stumble? The crowd leaned forward, hungry for his response. And across living rooms nationwide, families who had once been told to go back themselves held their breath, waiting to see if this man would finally say what they had always wanted to shout back. Because this clash was never just about two individuals locked in a sparring match. It was about the definition of Americanness itself. Karoline represented a shrinking but loud vision, one that measured belonging by ancestry, skin color, or last name. Kash represented another vision, older and yet more enduring, the belief that America's strength comes not from exclusion, but from inclusion. That what binds the nation is not where you came from, but the values you carry forward. The stakes could not have been higher. This was not simply a jab meant to score cheap applause. It was a line that could echo across the nation, becoming either a wound or a rallying cry. If Kash faltered, the insult would stand as yet another normalized attack, a green light for others to repeat it. But if he rose, if he met it with strength and dignity, he had the chance to flip the script entirely, to turn her insult into his triumph. The audience felt it. Even Karoline, beneath her smirk, must have sensed the ground shifting under her feet. The energy in the room was no longer hers. It had gathered around Kash, as though every silent pause was building pressure, waiting for him to release it. And outside the hall, the nation was already stirring. Phones buzzed. With alerts, clips of the insult shared faster than the debate itself could move. Commentators tweeted in disbelief, journalists whispered to producers, and hashtags were being born before Kash even opened his mouth. This was no longer just a debate. It was becoming a test of values, of identity, of America's moral center. And the next words Kash chose would not just be for himself. They would belong to everyone who had ever been told they did not belong. The insult was only the beginning. What followed would rewrite the entire narrative. Karoline Leavitt had always built her image on fire, not finesse. She was young, brash, and unapologetically eager to shock a candidate who thrived on moments that made headlines, even if those moments came at the expense of dignity. Her rise in politics had never been about measured reasoning or careful coalition building. It was about volume. It was about making enough noise that her name could not be ignored. And for a while, that strategy worked. Her speeches were peppered with jabs that played well in clips. Her interviews filled with lines, engineered for outrage rather than policy substance. She had discovered early that the modern media cycle rewards audacity more than it does humility. Every incendiary remark guaranteed another segment on cable news, another viral clip ricocheting across Twitter, and with each hit her profile rose, feeding the illusion that shock was the same thing as influence. But behind that veneer of confidence, there was something else. Desperation. Karoline was not yet a seasoned politician. She lacked the depth of experience, the scars of long campaigns, the steadying hand that comes with weathering true political storms. Instead, her career was a sprint, constantly chasing the next viral, sparked before the last one burned out. She lived in fear of irrelevance, and that fear pushed her toward ever sharper rhetoric. Each insult a little harsher than the last. This was not the first time she had reached for divisive language. Her history was full of moments when she blurred the line between bluntness and cruelty, cloaking hostility as straight talk. Supporters praised her as fearless, but critics saw something else. Recklessness. She wielded words like weapons, careless of where they landed or who they scarred. To her, politics was performance, and the stage demanded spectacle, and yet each calculated outburst revealed the cracks in her armor. Smirk she wore on stage, the confident tilt of her chin, they masked an awareness that without constant provocation, her relevance would evaporate. Unlike leaders who command respect through substance, Karoline relied on keeping the spotlight fixed on her through controversy. It was a fragile foundation, one that required endless escalation. That's why, in the heat of the debate, she reached for the insult that would become her undoing. Maybe you should just go back to India. Wasn't strategy, it was impulse. Born from arrogance and insecurity colliding in the same moment. It was the kind of line that might thrill a small segment of supporters, but repel the far larger audience watching with disbelief. It wasn't strength. It was a tell-proof of just how rattled she was by Kash's steady presence. For all her bluster, Karoline was still learning the brutal math of politics. Outrage can get you into the headlines, but it cannot protect you once the spotlight turns. Every smirk, every sneer, every dismissive wave of the hand becomes evidence. And in an era where everything is recorded, everything replayed, the wrong word at the wrong time can define a career forever. The irony was that Karoline's youth had once been her greatest selling point. She presented herself as the fresh face, the disruptor, the voice of a new generation tired of political doublespeak. But in her eagerness to appear fearless, she confused cruelty with authenticity. She thought tearing others down was the fastest way to build herself up. And in doing so, she misunderstood the most basic truth of leadership. People follow strength, it's not spite. On that stage, with the cameras unblinking and millions watching, her strategy collapsed in real time. What had once seemed like clever audacity now looked like hollow arrogance. What had once drawn headlines now threatened to define her as something smaller, meaner, and more desperate than she had ever intended. Because in the end, Karoline's persona was a house built on provocation. And arrogance has a way of crumbling under the weight of truth. Kash Patel's story did not begin on a debate stage. It began decades earlier, in a modest household shaped by sacrifice. His parents had come to America from India with little more than hope and determination, the kind of people who believed in the dream so fiercely that they were willing to leave everything familiar behind. They worked long hours, often at jobs that offered little recognition, but they never complained. To them, every struggle was an investment not for themselves, but for their children. Kash grew up in the in-between, balancing cultures, languages, and expectations. At home, he was steeped in the traditions of his heritage. At school, he was reminded daily that he was different. Lunches packed with unfamiliar foods drew stares. His last name was often mispronounced, sometimes mocked, and occasionally even, as a child, he heard the same phrase that would later be flung at him on stage: "Go back to where you came from." But instead of breaking him, those words shaped him. They became fuel. Kash learned early that the best way to silence doubt was not with anger, but with excellence. He applied himself, relentlessly studying harder, working longer, striving, to prove not just that he belonged, but that he could lead. His path carried him from the classroom to the courtroom, and eventually into the halls of power. He served in roles that demanded discretion, intelligence, and unshakable calm. The position he held was another quiet refutation of those who claimed he didn't belong. Service became the core of his identity, whether in law, national security, or advising leaders at the highest levels of government. Kash operated with the same principle his parents had instilled: dignity in the face of adversity. He did not chase headlines. He did not seek out the spotlight. He let his work speak for him, and it spoke volumes. Along the way, he faced his share of attacks. His name, his background, his loyalty, these were easy targets for critics looking to discredit him. But time and again, he absorbed the blows without lashing back. He knew that fury often feeds the attacker more than the attacked. He relied on patience, letting his consistency and competence speak louder than any insult. That calm composure became his signature. Where others raised their voices, he steadied his tone. Where others gestured wildly, he folded his hands and waited. It wasn't passivity, it was discipline. He understood that dignity under fire is more powerful than any shouted retort, and people noticed. Colleagues admired it. Adversaries grudgingly respected it. Supporters drew inspiration from it. What made Kash different wasn't just his resume or his accomplishments, but the way his life embodied the promise of America itself. His parents had come here believing in a dream. He had lived that dream, climbing step by step through education, service, and sacrifice. He carried himself not as someone who demanded acceptance, but as someone who proved through his work that he had earned it tenfold. So when Karoline leveled her insult, telling him to go back to India, it was more than a political cheap shot. It was an attack on the very essence of his journey, on the sacrifices his parents had made, on the millions of immigrant families who had walked a similar road. It wasn't just about him. It was about everyone who had ever been told they didn't belong, despite giving their all to this country. And that's what made the moment so potent. Kash wasn't just another politician trading barbs on a stage. He was a symbol of resilience, of the quiet strength that defines countless immigrant families across America. His silence in the seconds after the insult was not hesitation, was power. It was the weight of a life lived in service pressing against a moment of ignorance for the audience. Whether in the hall or watching from home, that history mattered. They may not have known every detail of his resume, but they felt the dignity in his presence. They recognized the steadiness of a man who had faced worse and never faltered. And they saw in him the reflection of their own families there. Own parents who had worked 2 jobs, their own grandparents who had crossed oceans with nothing but hope. Their own lives lived in the balance between 2 worlds. This wasn't just about politics. This was about a man whose entire life embodied the American dream. And that's exactly why his response hit with such force. The room had not yet recovered from the sting of Karoline's words when she chose to press further. Rather than retract, rather than soften the blow, she doubled down, leaning into the insult as if it were a badge of defiance. I'm saying what everyone else is too afraid to say, she declared, her voice rising above the unsettled murmurs of the crowd. This is America. If people don't love it as it is, if they don't respect where they are, maybe they should just leave. A few cheers erupted, scattered pockets of applause from her most fervent supporters, but they were drowned out by the louder, more visceral response. Gasps, groans, and even a few boos. The split was visible, one side thrilled by the audacity, the other recoiling at the cruelty. The moderator shifted uncomfortably, clearly aware of the ground slipping beneath the debate. Karoline mistook the noise for momentum. Her eyes flashed. Her tone hardened. I'm not here to sugarcoat reality. People are tired of political correctness. They want honesty. I'm going to give it to them straight, unfiltered, unapologetic. She slammed her hand lightly against the podium, punctuating each word as if the sheer force of repetition could will the audience to her side. But the more she spoke, the more she overreached. Her rhetoric, once framed as boldness, now teetered into hostility. A smirk that had seemed confident now looked brittle, forced. Every syllable revealed not strength but the fear of losing control. The audience, sensing it, began to lean away from her, their silence louder than their scattered applause. Meanwhile, Kash did not move. He stood at his podium, hands steady, gaze unwavering, as though carved from stone, while the cameras caught his stillness, the kind of composure that draws more power from silence than any outburst could. His eyes remained locked on Karoline, unblinking, unfazed, absorbing every word without giving her the satisfaction of a flinch, and that stillness made the contrast unbearable. One candidate thrashing louder and louder, the other rooted in a calm that felt immovable. Imbalance began to shift the room. People in the audience turned their eyes to Kash, waiting, almost pleading for him to answer. The anticipation grew with every second he remained silent. Karoline's voice faltered slightly. Betraying her own awareness of the moment, she tried to recover, lashing out again. You see? He has nothing to say. He won't even defend himself. Maybe that tells you everything you need to know. It was a gamble, but a weak one. The crowd knew better. They could see Kash wasn't silent because he had nothing to say. He was silent because he was choosing his moment. The moderator, sensing the drama crystallizing, turned toward him. Mr. Patel, she said softly, almost as if careful not to break the spell. Would you like to respond? The room hushed. Even those shifting uneasily in their seats, even those who had cheered for Karoline, leaned in. The nation itself seemed to pause, every living room, every screen waiting for the inevitable answer. Kash's chest rose slowly as he took a measured breath. His hands, resting gently on the podium, curled ever so slightly as if preparing to release something powerful. His gaze never broke. His composure remained absolute. And then in a moment so quiet that it pulled the entire hall into silence, Kash Patel leaned into the microphone, and then he leaned into the mic. The silence was thick, heavy enough to feel in the chest. Kash Patel leaned into the microphone, and with a steady, almost unhurried calm, began to speak. His voice was low at first, measured, deliberate, forcing the audience to lean in rather than push back. You told me to go back to India, he said, repeating her words with none of the venom she had laced into them. He let them hang in the air, let the room taste their bitterness all over again. But let me remind you, Karoline, I was born in America. I was raised here. I went to school here, served my country here. This is my home, and it has always been my home. A murmur rippled across the hall. Soft gasps, nods, the recognition of truth. Kash let the moment breathe, refusing to rush. He raised his eyes, scanning the crowd, as if searching for every person who had ever felt those same words thrown at them. My parents came here with nothing, he continued, his voice now stronger, steadier. They worked every job they could find. They sacrificed everything so their children could grow up with opportunities they never had. And they taught me to give back, to serve. To never forget that America is not about where you come from, but what you contribute. Scattered applause broke out, hesitant at first, then swelling as people could no longer keep their hands still. Karoline stiffened at her podium, her smirk faltering. Kash didn't look at her. He didn't need to. You see, he said, pausing. Just long enough for the words to sharpen. Telling someone to go back is not an argument. It's not leadership. It's an admission that you have nothing real to say. The room erupted, applause, cheers, even laughter at the sheer bluntness of the line. The moderator shifted in her seat, struggling to contain a smile. Kash's expression remained calm, almost serene, as if he had simply stated an obvious truth. That restraint made the impact even greater. But I will not go back, Kash pressed on, because my story is the American story. It is the story of millions of families who left behind everything familiar to build something better here. And to tell us that we don't belong is to deny the very fabric of what makes this country great. The words landed with force. Audience members nodded, some even standing, clapping before realizing the debate wasn't over. The cameras caught their faces, mothers, veterans, young students, all recognizing themselves in his words. It was more than politics. It was validation. Karoline tried to interject, but her microphone wasn't live. The moderator had wisely kept the focus where it belonged. Kash didn't glance at her once. He kept his eyes on the audience, on the millions watching at home. I've spent my entire life proving my loyalty to this country, Kash said. I've defended it, I've served it, I've given it everything I have. And I don't need to explain my Americanness to anyone, least of all someone who thinks patriotism is measured by insults. That line hit like a hammer. The audience roared, the sound rolling through the hall like a wave. Karoline shifted uncomfortably, her shoulders tightening, her gaze darting as if searching for an escape. The smirk was gone. What remained was the unmistakable discomfort of someone exposed. Someone stripped of pretense in front of the world. Kash, however, did not gloat. He didn't smile, didn't smirk, didn't revel in her discomfort. His calm was the final stroke. Of power, composure against chaos. Dignity against arrogance. He leaned in once more. His voice softening, lowering, as if speaking directly to those who needed it most. To every child watching this who has ever been told they don't belong, I want you to hear me clearly. You are America. Your dreams, your work, your sacrifice, they are the heartbeat of this nation. Don't let anyone ever tell you otherwise. Hall erupted again, this time with a standing ovation from corners that had remained quiet until now. People clapped until their hands stung, cheered until their voices cracked. On their feet, they weren't just applauding Kash Patel. They were applauding themselves, their families, their stories. For a long moment, Karoline was frozen. She tried to adjust her notes, tried to summon a smile, but the cameras betrayed. Her shifting, her blinking, her silence. She had no retort. Nothing she could say would survive against the force of what had just been spoken. Kash stood still, accepting the applause with quiet humility, nodding slightly but never raising, his arms in triumph. His power was not in victory poses, but in restraint, in the dignity of a man who knew the truth did not need embellishment. And in that contrast, the debate crystallized, one candidate crumbling under the weight of her own words, the other rising, steady and unshaken, embodying the values he had just defended. The cameras panned across the audience, stares in the eyes of an older immigrant man, a student beaming with pride, even a few undecided voters now clapping harder than anyone else. The moment had transcended the debate. It had become a reflection of something larger, something national, something personal to millions. Kash's voice dropped to almost a whisper, yet it carried more force than any shout. This country is mine. It is yours. It belongs to all of us who believe in it enough to build it every single day. The applause shook the room. Karoline lowered her gaze. The moderators didn't bother to cut him off. For once, the debate stage had become something more than a contest. It had become a declaration. But as powerful as the moment was, it was only the beginning. Because outside those walls, another storm was building. One that no debate stage could contain. But the debate wasn't over. The internet was about to explode. The debate hall was still buzzing as the cameras powered down, but outside in the unrelenting digital world, the explosion had already begun. Within minutes of Kash Patel's mic drop rebuttal, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook were flooded with clips of the exchange. It was the kind of moment that didn't just trend, it detonated across every corner of the internet. The hashtags began climbing almost instantly. Hashtag We Are America. Hashtag Stand With Kash. Hashtag Go Back No More. By midnight, they were all in the global top 10. A single clip of Kash's calm, deliberate takedown captioned simply, "This is what dignity looks like," amassed 3 million views in less than an hour. On TikTok, creators wasted no time. Some slowed the footage down, overlaying swelling orchestral music as Kash leaned into the mic, eyes steady. Others added fiery subtitles. "This is my home. This has always been my home." Teenagers stitched their own stories of belonging onto his words. Veterans posted their endorsements. Children of immigrants, Mexican, Chinese, Nigerian, Afghan, shared their parents' sacrifices and their own small victories in school or work, all under Kash's defiant line, "This country is mine, it is yours." Meanwhile, memes tore into Karoline Leavitt. Screenshots of her stiff posture, her faltering smirk became instant internet currency. One viral edit placed her side by side with a crashing Jenga tower, captioned, "Arrogance has a way of crumbling." Another showed Kash calmly sipping tea while Karoline's image was engulfed in cartoon flames. The caption reading, "Dignity." Desperation. The ripple effect spread fast. News anchors interrupted regular programming to replay the exchange. Commentators from both sides of the aisle labeled it the moment that silenced the room. A CNN host called it the most powerful defense of the American dream on a debate stage in decades. Fox News, though hesitant, acknowledged the unexpected resonance of Patel's words. Even late-night comedians, notorious for biting satire, admitted the clash felt less like politics and more like history in the making. And then came the celebrity endorsements. Actor Mark Ruffalo tweeted, "This is what leadership looks like. .com, principled, unshakable. Hashtag Stand With Kash." Retired NBA star Dwyane Wade posted a short clip of Kash's final words, captioned simply with an American flag emoji. Country singer Jason Aldean, who rarely comments on politics, chimed in, "Every immigrant family I've ever known worked harder than anyone. Kash nailed it. Proud moment." But perhaps most striking were the ordinary voices. A mother in Texas posted a video of her 2 young sons watching the clip on her phone. One of them whispered, "He sounds like Dad." Her caption read, "For the first time in a long time, I feel seen." A truck driver in Ohio wrote, "I don't usually care about debates, but that guy spoke for me. My grandparents were told to go back to tonight. We went forward." The stories poured in, each echoing the same refrain. Kash's words weren't just about him. They were about millions who had heard the same insult, lived the same doubt, and finally saw someone stand tall against it. By the following morning, hashtags had turned into movements. College students organized impromptu rallies under the banner hashtag We Are America, holding signs with Kash's lines, "This country is mine, it is yours." Churches, mosques, and synagogues across the country referenced the debate in sermons, framing, "It is a reminder of unity." Even teachers brought it into classrooms, asking students to reflect on what belonging means. Meanwhile, Karoline's camp struggled to contain the firestorm. Her attempt to clarify the comment that she meant Patel's ideas should go back, not him personally, backfired immediately. The internet mocked the excuse mercilessly. A trending meme paired her statement with the caption, "When the homework's due and you didn't read the book." Every attempt she made to spin the insult only fueled the flames, in stark contrast. Kash's team didn't need to do much. His words stood on their own, replayed endlessly, dissected in podcasts, written about in think pieces. The fact that he remained calm, even as the world crowned him the victor, only elevated his stature. But the most important validation came not from journalists, celebrities, or strategists. It came from the people. Immigrant families who had long felt invisible suddenly found themselves at the center of a national conversation. Millions of Americans felt seen that night, one columnist wrote, and that feeling cannot be measured in poll numbers alone. The night had created more than a viral clip. It had created a cultural shift, a rallying point for dignity, belonging, and the definition of Americanness itself. And as Kash's words continued to ripple outward, it became clear this was no longer just a debate moment. It was a narrative, a movement, spark that would burn far beyond the stage, because for every insult meant to divide, there was now a counter-story that united. For every attempt to silence, there was now an echo too loud to ignore. The internet hadn't just exploded, had chosen a side, and it was standing with Kash Patel. As the shockwaves of the debate settled, deeper truth began to crystallize. The clash between Karoline Leavitt and Kash Patel was never just about two politicians trading barbs. It was about something far larger, the soul of America itself. What unfolded on that stage, under the glare of cameras and the judgment of millions, became a defining reminder of what this country aspires to be. Kash Patel's quiet composure was not a show of restraint. It was a deliberate statement. By refusing to meet insult with anger, he reframed the entire attack. Where Karoline attempted to reduce him to ancestry, Kash lifted the moment into a meditation on contribution, dignity, and shared values. America. He reminded the nation was never designed to be about bloodlines or birthplace. From the very beginning, it was meant to be a covenant of ideals, liberty, opportunity, justice. To tell someone to go back is to deny that covenant, to suggest that belonging is earned through heritage instead of effort. And in exposing that flaw, Kash revealed a truth that resonated with millions. Americanness is not inherited, is lived. This was why his response carried such weight. He did not argue for himself alone. He spoke for every immigrant family who had built businesses, taught classrooms, fought in wars, or simply worked grueling hours so their children could live freer lives. He spoke for every child who ever wondered if their skin color, their accent, or their last name disqualified them from full belonging. His words reached into households across the country and said, "You belong. You always have." And so the insult meant to diminish instead became a stage for dignity to triumph. Kash's calm, his steady delivery, his refusal to bend, it transformed a moment of division into a moment of unification. Where arrogance had tried to sow contempt, dignity instead planted belonging. The lesson was unmistakable. America's strength does not lie in telling people where they cannot belong, but in opening its arms to those who choose to contribute. Its greatness has never come from exclusion, but from inclusion. From the farmer's hands, the factory worker's sweat, the teacher's patience, soldier's sacrifice, regardless of where their ancestors came from. Commentators later described it as more than a rebuttal. They called it a national mirror. By defending his place, Kash forced the nation to look inward and confront its own contradictions. How often had Americans forgotten that their own stories began with migration, with struggle, with starting anew? How often had they let fear overshadow the promise of belonging? His words did not shame, they reminded. They pulled Americans back to their better angels. And perhaps that was the true power of the moment. It was not about winning a debate. It was about restoring perspective. To tell someone to go back is to insult not just them, but the very essence of the country, a land that was never about exclusion, but always about expansion of opportunity. Kash transformed that insult into a rallying cry for unity, dignity, shared identity. As the cameras faded and the noise of punditry raged on, one image lingered above all. A man sitting calmly under fire, choosing not bitterness but truth, not rage but resolve. That calm became the final word. It carried further than any insult ever could, because dignity has a way of echoing. And in that moment, as applause erupted, as hashtags soared, as families whispered to one another that they finally felt seen, America remembered what it stands for. Not ancestry, not exclusion, not fear, but contribution, belonging, and the unshakable dignity of those who choose to call this land their home. Karoline's words were meant to wound. They were meant to reduce, to push someone out of the circle of belonging. Right. It was Kash's response that defined the night, not as a moment of insult, but as a moment of clarity. The nation saw the contrast laid bare, Arrogance against dignity, division against unity, hate against truth. And in that contrast, something powerful emerged. Because when Kash spoke, he wasn't just defending himself. He was defending the very idea of America, that no one's worth is determined by their ancestry, but by the values they uphold and the contributions they make. This night reminded millions of something too is forgotten. Dignity is louder than insult. Truth is stronger than lies. And the essence of Americanness is not found in exclusion but in belonging. That is the real legacy of this exchange. Not the insult, not the smear, but the calm, unshakable reminder that the American story belongs to everyone who chooses to build it. And so, the lesson lingers. If you believe dignity will always outshine hate, share this. If you believe that America is strongest when it remembers its true self, let your voice be part of that echo. This isn't just about one debate. It's about a movement, a conversation, a choice about the kind of country we want to be. Join us. Subscribe, stay connected, and be part of a community that values truth, respect, and the unbreakable promise of belonging. Because the story isn't over. The real story is the one we write together, and in that story, dignity always wins.